The Audi TT gets a bit of a mixed reception. Some people love the cutesy sort of modern look, some people just hate it. And some people, well, they get what this is all about. But the TTRS, this is completely different. This is a properly focused car. And I think I love it. First up, that 2.5 litre 5-pot engine. We know how good that sounds, but sadly for 2020, it's got a little bit muted thanks to those OPF filters to bring the emissions down and to comply with the latest EU regulations, which is a real shame, but you do still get that warble, that sound at the top end. It still comes through into the cabin, which is nice. The second thing I love about this car is this interior. Now, I think out of all of the cars it competes against in its class, I'm thinking Cayman, I'm thinking Alpine, and I'm thinking BMW M2 competition, this is by far the nicest cockpit. So Audi has done away with the central screen. It's got this nice digital cockpit now with everything is in the sensor here. Everything is driver focused, which I think a lot of cars have forgotten about. I mean, the M2 competition, for example, is a standard 2 or 3 series interior. There's no changes at all. But here, everything's just nice. I mean, take a look at these vents, for example. The little digital screen that tells you the aircon's on, tells you the temperature in the sensor. It just looks smart, it looks premium, it looks like it justifies the price tag. And that's another thing I want to come on to, because this car here is £64,000 our spec. Now, this is the Sport Edition. So in addition to all the regular stuff, you get the digital cockpit and everything else. You also get these 20-inch wheels, the sports exhaust system, and you also get all the black badging around instead of the chrome, which is a nice touch. Some people find it a bit tacky, but I think it adds that little bit more aggression to the TT, which I think is missing at times with its rounded edges. Now, with 400 horsepower on tap, I think it's about time we explored some of that performance, shall we? As you can hear, that warble comes in right at the top end. Above 3.5, 4K is when it really comes on song, and it pulls right towards the red line. But unfortunately, just below that mark, it's a little bit gutless, if I'm honest. It feels like there's a lot of turbo lag, and that might be to do with the new mapping they've had to introduce to work with this new EU compliancy. Guys with the pre-facelift cars are saying that it launches much harder off the line than these newer cars. Now, truthfully, the facts say it's still 0 to 62 in 3.7 seconds. It's still 155 mile an hour and whatnot. But there is a bit of a lack of urgency with this. And I'm sat in third gear, about 35 mile an hour, just under 3,000 RPM. And if I plant my foot now, it takes a few seconds, and there we go. You probably see me just go back in my seat slightly then. It takes a few seconds for that turbo just to come in. But now you have to really think about it, and it was almost treated like a naturally aspirated engine in the sense that you need to be much lower to get that power delivery out. Another downside to the TTRS is you don't get adaptive suspension like you do in, say, the Porsche, which just helps dial things down a bit. And on particularly back roads like this, where it's quite bumpy, it's quite nice just to dial it down so you're not quite so fidgety across the road. You sort of lack confidence when you're bumping all over the place, and I find this a bit too stiffly damped for a proper B road hoon, which is a shame. But you can get the magnetic ride, but you do need to upgrade the trim level to the Vorsprung edition, which is the one up from this Sport edition. Now, as you can imagine, with it being Quattro, it has an unlimited amount of grip, and it uses the tried and tested Howdeck system, and there's so much grip on offer. You can really use the throttle mid-corner to send you out, and you're gone. It just grips and goes. When you're really pressing on, of course you do have some of that understeer that plagues a lot of the Audis, because you've got a lot of the weight at the front here, and on these 20-inch wheels, you've got barely any profile at all. The Howdeck system, because it sends 50% of the power to the rear via a clutch pack, the rear end isn't anywhere near as playful as, say, a Focus RS, where it can send up to 95% of the power backwards. The trade-off is a serious amount of grip, which makes it a point-to-point car. It makes it very, very fast. As I mentioned, with 400 horsepower, you can really get a move on any road. And that gearbox, as I said again, is so fast as well. You'll be traveling at silly speeds within no time. But then when you get to a corner, you stamp on the brakes, fantastic brakes, 8-pot calipers at the front. You can get a carbon ceramic. People who have watched my videos before will know that I'm not a massive fan of carbon ceramics on the road. I find they take too long to warm up, don't offer the initial bite that I'd like, to save you money. Now, contrary to popular belief, it's actually fairly practical. Okay, those back seats can't house 2 adults, only children, but the boot space is very, very good. And in fact, we just found that putting Joe's camera gear in the boot was easier than putting it in his Mini 1499 GT, which says a lot, really, considering this is predominantly a 2-seater sports car. Now, with it being a TT as well, things like maintenance and running costs aren't as astronomical as they are on a Porsche. The downside to this being 64 grand is that on a PCP deal, for example, roughly a 48-month contract is between £700 and £1,000 per month, depending on the length of term, and around 10,000 miles per year with a 5 grand deposit. It's not a cheap car. Now, sadly, we are getting word that there won't be a 4th generation TT, which is a real shame, because I think this TTRS, this Mark III version, is probably the best of the range, and it's only got better through time. Now, some people will argue the Mark I is the best of the lot, but I think the Mark III has moved, obviously, with the times, and it's embraced this new wave of technology, particularly with the digital cockpit, and now it feels like a really nice premium place to be. Thankfully, this engine lives on. It will be in the new RS3 and hopefully RSQ3 going forward, so it won't be the end of this signature warble that we know and love. Yeah, I think I'll be sad to see the TT go, because I think now it's got rid of those cutesy arguments, and now it's starting to be considered as a proper sports car. For driving pleasure, it's the Porsche, but there's something about this Audi, I'm really starting to like it. Yeah, I'm going to be very sad when this goes.